Good morning, everyone. I'm Pranjum Bora, currently teaching in Bahana College, Jorhat, and your moderator for today's session. I would like to welcome our respected resource person, Dr. Alok Kumar Pandey, sir, IQAC coordinator, sir, Dr. Pankaj Bora, and all the participants to this second day of the online workshop on research methodology for ethnographic studies, and particular to today's session on data collection techniques in ethnography, organized by IQAC Cell Bahana College in collaboration with the Sutiya Jatiya Gobeshona Porishod. Now, I would like to introduce you all to our honorable resource person, Sir Dr. Alok Kumar Pandey. So he is currently the assistant professor of Department of Anthropology under University of Hyderabad. His academic and research interests include the topics like environment and society, natural resources and indigenous communities, nomadic and pastoral societies, mountain regions, development and livelihood, ethnographical as well as anthropological theories. He has been awarded with UGC's Dr. Radhakrishnan Postdoctoral Fellow in Humanities and Social Sciences. He had worked as a research associate under Government of India and then also as a research assistant at Indira Gandhi National Forest Academy conducted by Indian Institute of Management. Then, Sir has a number of publications which includes sedentarization and changing contours of religious identities, the Torah landscape, sacred modernity, land ownership, conflicts and dispute, and many more. Sir had also contributed academic relations for Indira Gandhi Open University, Dr. B.R. Ambedkar University, and Yashwantrao Chavan Academy of Development Administration. So, before starting our session, I would like to request all the participants to mute themselves. And as we all know, that there will be an discussion session after the end of this. So, yes, over to you, sir.
Okay, very good morning to all of you. And I really thank the organizers for giving me this opportunity to present some thoughts on the data gathering tools and techniques in ethnography. Am I audible to everyone?
Yes, sir.
Okay, great. So I'm assuming that the workshop has a diverse participants belonging to different disciplines. So keeping that in mind, I have tried and made my lecture today quite simplistic because I think I'm assuming that some of you may be new to ethnography, though the term ethnography is commonly in circulation these days. When we another factor which actually struck my mind was that it is so nice to know that, you are organizing a session completely on ethnography. And that's really encouraging because ethnography as a qualitative research methodology is by and large still on the margins because quantitative research is still dominating the research paradigm. Of course, a good research approach takes in a combination of both qualitative as well as quantitative methods into consideration. With the fact that I'm given the topic to talk about tools and techniques in terms of how we gather data in ethnography, it is a very exhaustive, sets of approaches in ethnography. So, given the kind of exhaustive tools and techniques that are available for one to carry out qualitative research, I will not be able to cover everything in this 1.5 hours session because this requires, we teach this as part of maybe a whole semester to our students. So I guess my effort is trying to, comprise or concise the whole tools and techniques in this session. So having said this background, I will move into my lecture directly. So I'll be using a PowerPoint presentation. Is that fine? And can I also then switch off my video, or do you want the video on?
Yes, sir, you can proceed with the PowerPoint as you wish. If you want to off the video, then okay, fine.
Okay, maybe I think the PowerPoint presentation, so I'll keep my video off, but if required, I'll switch it on. Is that all right?
Okay.
I'm moving ahead.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah, thanks. It is not allowing me to. Okay. It is not allowing me to screen share from my end.
We are trying.
Yeah, so no worries.
Sir, will you check again?
Yeah, I'm checking. Just a minute. No, this string not allowing me. Present.
Sir, sorry for the inconvenience.
No problem. Should I just go ahead and speak rather than use the PowerPoint? I can use it on my screen.
Yeah,
Or,
sure. So, yeah, can you wait for another 5 minutes?
Yeah, I'll wait. No problem. That's fine. That's fine.
Thank you, sir.
Yeah.
Excuse me, sir.
Yes, please.
Sir, can you mail us the PowerPoint?
Actually, you want me to mail you the PowerPoint?
Yeah.
I think I have already mailed the PowerPoint on the email that was shared with me. But you want me to do it again?
Yes, sir, please. Please.
Okay. Just a minute.
Yes, sir. Now you can. We will. Hello, sir.
Yeah, I'm back.
Yes,
Yeah,
sir.
that's fine.
Yeah.
Okay. So what I'm going to do is I'll open my PowerPoint and then deliver the lecture, and you can just keep moving as I speak. Is that all right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Very good. So I think, am I audible?
Yes, sir, you are.
Okay, great. So we are going to talk about data collection techniques in ethnography today. Uh, Ethnography has its origins in the discipline of anthropology. You know, sometime around the, you know, 19th, 20th century, with the works of anthropologists who were in the context of colonialism, trying to understand different or other cultures. So basically, when we're talking about ethnography and its roots in anthropology, we need to understand what a bit about anthropology is. And I think this is commonly known to many people. Anthropology is not the study of people as we think, because I would subscribe to the idea of Tim Ingold, another anthropologist, who says anthropology is the study with people. That means our knowledge, our understanding, our insights about society, culture, and various aspects of society comes by engaging with people in the context in which the anthropologist or the ethnographer is located. So it is not a study of people in that sense, but it is study along with people, because our knowledge, what we know, comes from the people that we are studying. So anthropological knowledge, basically the epistemology of anthropology, particularly in social and cultural anthropology, it comes from this basis of ethnography. Sorry, I'm really sorry about that. Okay, so this knowledge that we're talking about in terms of anthropology is basically a situated knowledge. And what I mean by situated knowledge is that it is located and is emerging from the anthropologist or the ethnographer being located very much within the context of people. So it arises from certain people and for certain purposes of understanding. But if we look at what is the need to talk about ethnography, basically ethnography fits in this larger idea of wanting to know, and that is why it is a qualitative research, because the fundamental idea is we want to know about people, we want to know about why people act in a particular way, or why do they behave in a particular way, or what is that meaning that people assign to their lives. So basically, ethnography is a research, and it is a qualitative research, and it is wanting to know. But this wanting to know actually occurs based on the five senses of the human beings. That means it is the involvement of the five senses, that is sight, which is vision, smell, with the use of the nose, whether it's taste, because sometimes we taste the food of the cultures that we are located in, or a particular plant that they're using. It's about hearing and touching. So wanting to know is about involving these five senses that are interacting with one another, but after all, it is mediated by the human cognition. So our wanting to know is about involving our very senses. So when we talk about ethnographic methodology, it actually emerges from the very different senses itself. That means when we talk about ethnographic methodology, it is somewhere related to some sense of the human being. And the most important cognitive mode in ethnography is seeing and hearing. That means it is about using our eyes and empirically looking at the concrete reality. And here the concrete reality is the people or the culture or the society or the group or the association that one is interested in wanting to know. At the same time, there is also the involvement of the sense of the ear, which is hearing. So two important cognitive modes for ethnography are seeing and hearing. If we understand this, then perhaps we'll be able to move along with the various tools and techniques in ethnography. So for the ethnographer, basically observation, which is coming from seeing, becomes the primary source of information, and the ethnographer also uses hearing as a way of gathering data. So basically, when we're talking about hearing, the ethnographer is engaged with the idea of the speech act. Am I audible? I mean, am I audible to everybody?
Yes, sir, you are audible.
Okay, fine. Thank you. Thanks for confirming. So basically, it is about the involvement of the senses, and primarily it is seeing and hearing. So then, what is ethnography? Before we move into the tools and techniques of gathering data, basically it is a descriptive account of non-literate people. This was said by the British anthropologist Radcliffe Brown. It's descriptive accounts of non-literate people. I mean, of course, they were located in a context of doing field work of, quote unquote, tribal societies or, pre-literate societies. And since they were engaged with studying these societies, but what they were doing was providing a descriptive account. That means a very detailed descriptions about the lives of people. So ethno emerges from people or folk, and graphy is writing about or describing something. So here I want to flag one important point is that though we are talking about ethnography and techniques of collecting data, primarily and the most important aspect what the ethnographer does is writing. That is why ethnography entails writing about or describing something or a culture or a community of people. That means it is the description of people and their culture. So what do ethnographers do? Basically, they observe, they record, and they render. That means they observe with the eyes, and they also hear through the process of interviewing. And this is recorded through various mediums, either through written words or using a camera to record something or using an audio recording device. The recording is done. And finally, it is about rendering. Rendering means making it available to somebody who wants to read or is interested, or to the peer academic community about the particular community or culture. So basically, ethnography is about writing about cultures, people. It is the ethnographer who observes, records, and then renders. So ethnography basically entails also using the tools and techniques, but finally it has to be communicated, and communicated through writing, either as a monograph, as an article, an academic article, or it can be a blog, any medium of writing. So basically, ethnography is polysemous. And what we mean by this is that it relies first on empirical ways of gathering data. Empirical means the ethnographer being present himself or herself or themselves within the context of what they want to study. So the ethnographer has to be there. So it's empirical. It's based on using the senses, and the emphasis is on a qualitative aspect of things vis-a-vis a quantitative. So we are not so much interested in numerical aspects of the society. We're not interested in counting of of course we do that, but ethnography by its interest is more in looking at the qualitative aspects. And then it is an inductive. It's an inductive approach because the ethnographer studies a particular society. That means an individual society, an individual institution, an individual community. So the generalization which happens at a later stage. But in ethnography, we begin with the particular and we are inductive. That means we start from the particular and then move to the general, because we have to be located within a context. So it is empirical, it is qualitative, and it is inductive in its approach. Basically, what ethnography does is to make the strange familiar and the familiar strange. It's a very interesting phrase. Making the strange familiar, that means what we are, what we are not knowing, or what is unknown. Through the process of ethnography, it is made familiar. By understanding it, studying it, conducting field work, we make it familiar. And what we assume is known or familiar is made strange. That means it is distanced by the process of ethnographic inquiry. So what ethnography aims to do is make the strange familiar and the familiar strange. So basically, the ethnographer has to be present when events happened and saw with own eyes. That means it's very empirical. And when we say ethnography is polysemous, basically there are three terms which are merging with ethnography. That is participant observation, field work, and case study. That means sometimes when we talk about ethnography, synonymously it refers to the idea of field work, conducting participant observation, or doing case studies. That means of a particular institution, a particular people, a particular case, or a particular society. So it's polysemous in its meaning because these various other aspects of inquiry also merge with ethnography. Most importantly, ethnography is a product and a process. And this is an important aspect to understand, because what we are going to engage today is the process part of the ethnography and not so much a product. So it's a process and a product. That means there are a series of events which are interrelated that will finally result in the ethnography. So the most important instrument in this whole ethnographic inquiry, or tools or methods of collecting this data, is the ethnographer himself or herself. That means without the ethnographer, we cannot be using other tools and methods to gather data. So the first instrument is the ethnographer itself, or herself or himself, who employs all other methods. And the application or the gathering of that data, qualitative aspects of life, is the process part of ethnography. And finally, this process manifests through fieldwork, through participant observation, through the process of interviewing, and finally, it is about writing up of the research. In other words, what appears as a product, as an ethnography, has to undergo a certain process. And that process is about invoking different tools and techniques in gathering data. The anthropologist Harry Walcott says ethnography is a way of seeing. And what he means by this is basically culture is not something that is waiting for the anthropologist to be discovered. Right? It is not lying down that when the ethnographer goes in, culture would suddenly jump up and show itself to the ethnographer. No. In fact, culture has to be inferred. It has to be arrived at through the very process of inquiry itself. So ethnography is a way of seeing. It is a way of attributing meaning. It's a way of attributing culture in what we study. So it's a product and a process. And finally, it is the ethnographer who's the most crucial instrument itself. And by this, I'm not reducing a human being to a tool or a technique. No. What I'm trying to suggest is that the first instrument is the senses of the ethnographer itself, who then employs various other techniques to gather data in the process of conducting the inquiry. So we come to field work because we are talking about the different aspects. When we talk about field work, basically it means a complete immersion or a total residence in the community or culture that the ethnographer is studying. Right? That means complete immersion means one has to be staying there, being located physically there to gather data. And of course, today there is the online medium, right? Through online ways, people are gathering data. But in other words, you have to be there. There has to be a complete immersion in what one is doing to gather that data. And what we do is basically observe behavior. Behavior is basically how one responds or acts in relation to one another or oneself. And this is basically externally displayed. That means maybe somebody is making a craft, or somebody is weaving something, or somebody is gathering plants from the forest, or there is a ritual dance that is occurring. So this behavior is externally displayed. That is one aspect of fieldwork. But the other aspect is to try and arrive at the social and cultural meaning of people. And this is not so explicit. It is basically implied, it is hidden. And that is why the task of the ethnographer is to try and arrive at something known as the emic perspective. That means the insider's point of view. And Melnovsky said this in his study of the Trobriand Islanders, to grasp the native's point of view, his relation to life, to realize his vision of his world. Let's not take that his too seriously, because of course it was written at a point of time when there was a total gender thrust only on men. But I think if we take this meaning and the idea to a larger understanding, it is about understanding the native's point of view, their relation to life, and also try and realize their vision of their own world. And that is why the effort of ethnography is to arrive at that cultural meaning that is sometimes hidden and not overtly visible. Basically, what ethnography does is creating cultural knowledge. And what we mean by cultural knowledge is basically the symbols, the hidden meanings, the meanings that people attach to their own life and how they interpret their own world. And this, what the anthropologist Clifford Geertz talks about, is to arrive at thick description. And what he means by thick description is basically a very detailed, rich description of specific events, actions, or behaviors. So it is just not noting down events which are occurring. No, but it is also about getting into the details, the richer explanations, the descriptions about why people are behaving the way they are behaving, or how they're relating to one another. What are the objects? What are the material that they're using? So basically, what ethnography should aim to account is thick description. That means very detailed descriptions about very minute details of every aspect of the life of people. And of course, the ethnographer cannot study everything under the sun, because after all, life is too complicated, events are too diverse, but we set out with what we want to study. And when we set out with what we want to study and understand, we have to arrive at a rich or thick description. So cultural knowledge is both about the explicit and the tacit knowledge. That means hidden. That means using language as a medium to get into the minds of people, of how they attach meaning to people, to events, to the materials that people are using. In other words, what the ethnographer and the field worker is doing is basically description and interpretation of cultural behavior. We are all not only just describing the various aspects of people's life, the cultural meanings, the cultural knowledge, but also we are interpreting that cultural behavior. And this can be done only if the anthropologist or the ethnographer is located within the context of people that he or she wants to study. So if we look at ethnography, basically ethnography can be broadly divided, and this is where I'm getting into the techniques of gathering data for our study in ethnography. If we look at ethnography, basically we are dealing with basically non-verbal or behavioral acts. That means those actions which are not expressed through words or through language. That means how people are behaving through bodily manner, through using material in relation to the environment or to people. So we are looking at non-verbal or behavioral acts. And for this, the primary tool is observation. That means we have to observe and watch using our senses, that is of vision, in understanding how people or individuals are behaving in the context in which they are located. And observation has two aspects, which is non-participant observation and participant observation. And I'll come to this in the coming slides. But this overview will just give you an understanding of how the tools and techniques work within the context of ethnography. And the other aspect is speech acts. So one is non-verbal and the other is verbal acts. And when we talk about verbal acts, we are primarily referring to the use of the spoken language, the use of words. And this can only be captured not through observation, because a word which is uttered cannot be seen. I can write it down, it's a different matter. But the writing down again communicates a meaning to me. So primarily I'm engaged with hearing what people are saying or how they are communicating. So basically the speech act, we have to use the tool of interviews or key informant interviews or group interviews to capture the meanings, the statements that people are making, or how they are describing things about their own lives. So ethnography, broadly we can talk about the non-verbal or behavioral acts and also the speech acts. And both require different sets of tools to elicit information or data when we are trying to study a community or we are wanting to do ethnography. Am I audible? I mean, are we together?
Yes, sir.
Okay.
You can continue.
Fine, I'm continuing. So we'll move on to the first tool, which is observation. Observation is a very important and is a very primary tool for conducting ethnography. And as I said, observation is about seeing. But when we say observation, what we mean by observation is basically a heightened awareness in the location or the context that the ethnographer is present. And what we mean by heightened awareness is you become a bit more alert, you become a bit more conscious of the surrounding that in which you are located. When we say observation, pure observation is not possible, because after all, observation is always intentional. Once we say observe, that means we are looking at and looking for something. We're just not merely stating events one after the other. That means every observational act has some intention behind it. So there is nothing known as pure observation, because they are always intended. Even an act of bird watching basically entails an element of selection. That means what we want to observe, the kind of bird, the color, the trees that it is sitting on, are they moving in a group or not? In other words, what I'm trying to emphasize is observation occurs with a background of some theory, some concept, some idea, some assumption that is influencing one to observe. That means there is already something working behind the scene which observation is made. That means any observation cannot be just merely done or simply done. There has to be something influencing, some idea by which we are observing. And that is why when we're talking about, it is looking at and looking for. So we have some idea of why we are making that observation. Even in generally observing, there is an intention. But when it comes to ethnographic observation, we are located within the context of the community, the culture, the people. We are looking for something. That is why we are observing. And that looking for something is basically influenced by your research questions. Your research problem that you have set out. You can't just go and observe, right? There's something which is working to influence the idea of observation. So what is the observation focus? Basically, we focus on actors, right? That means people who are located within an activity. We are looking at events and actions, how people are behaving with one another, what are they doing, and what are the objects and products that they are using. In other words, what do we observe? We observe people, we observe events, we observe actions of people, and we also observe the objects and the products that people are using. So this is basically the material aspect of people. That means how are they maybe using a computer, or how people are tending their livestock, or how are they climbing a tree to cut down the branches to feed their buffaloes, right? So we are looking at actors, actions, and also the objects. That means how are they cutting, how are they climbing, various. So this all is based on observation. So basically what James Bradley says, we observe what people do, which is their cultural behavior. We observe things people make and use, such as clothes and tools, which are cultural artifacts. And we listen to what people say, that is speech messages. That means we are observing cultural behavior, we are observing cultural artifacts, but we are listening to what people are saying, because what people are saying cannot be observed. In other words, what Spradley suggests, the anthropologist James Spradley, he suggests that we are engaged in various levels of observation. So one is a grand tour observation. A grand tour means an overview of things. So when you walk into a university and you say, maybe your ward is studying there or your friend is studying in the university, what do? They take you around the university or even a city. You come to a new city, they show you around. So in the university, see, this is the administrative building, this is where the classes happen, these are the hostels. From outside itself, they give you a grand tour. And what are you doing? You are observing and getting to understand the location, the people, getting some idea of what is happening in the university setting. So this is like a grand tour observation, or what in participatory and rapid rural appraisal, what we find is transect walks. You would have heard of this term, transect walks. That means the people in the village show you around the village. You walk along with them to map the resources that are available in the village. This is basically a grand tour observation. That means you are getting to see things from a very large or a wide angle perspective. And then you can employ mini tour observation. That means you are interested to see how the library is. So you tell your friend, no, take me to the library. So from a grand tour observation, you are entering into a mini tour observation of the library. You're getting in to see, how the library is structured, how are the books organized, how does one access it, who is sitting where, how many floors are there, are people using the library, or is just a library for the sake of only the books? That means it is a functional library. So we enter a mini tour observation. So grand tour observation is an overview of things, a wide angle of things, and then our focus is a bit more concentrated, and there we enter a mini tour observation. It can be of anything. It can be of event. It can be about a group which is doing a particular activity. You want to say, how do self-help groups work? So you want to go and sit with the self-help group members and see how they are conducting themselves. You're observing. That means this is a mini tour observation and a grand tour observation. So observation basically is we are looking for actors, we are looking for events, and we are looking for objects and products as well. James Bradley gives 9 dimensions of observation. And what are these 9 dimensions? One is space, the physical space itself. That means, is it a forest community? Is it an urban space? Is it a cafe, or is it a hospital? The physical space itself is about the idea of the space that the ethnographer wants to understand. Next, he talks about the actor, the people involved in that space, right? The gender of people, maybe the various roles. Just by observation, you can see and tell people are doing different things in a different setting. So who are these people? And that needs to be confirmed. Sometimes there may be a nameplate. There may be a very clear-cut depiction of what the person is. Because when you go to the counter and you see reception or receptionist written, you know that the person sitting behind the counter is, the actor is a receptionist, right? But sometimes these labels are not available. So we have to again cross-check. So actor, the people involved, the activity, the various actions that people are performing in the space, and the actors performing the various activities. The object, the physical things that people are using. So that sometimes in a hospital setting, these days, the higher rung of the doctors don't appear in a uniform, or sometimes they do, depending on the different hospital. But definitely the nurses are in a dress code. So that these are a separate set of people. That means the physical things that they're using in the context of where they're located. Then the act, the individual act carried out by the people itself, each one performing a particular action or activity. And then event, a set of activities carried out by all the people, the hospital setting, or maybe a government office or a school, right? All the activities that the people involved they are conducting. Time is a very important aspect, because we are looking for the chronological sequence of how things are occurring. So in observation, we also need to observe how one event precedes or follows another event. And this can be done only in the context of time. And then there is a goal, the aim of the people, or what they wish to accomplish or they want to fulfill as a collective, as a community, or maybe the whole setting itself. And of course, the feelings, the emotions that are expressed. Now, the emotions, of course, can be expressed using words, but sometimes the body language also tells. So we have to carefully observe and infer from the body language, the expressions, the pauses of what the feeling of the actor is in the context of what we're trying to study. So Bradley basically gives 9 dimensions of observation. That means to observe, we need to keep these nine things in mind and go ahead with the act of observation. In other words, to make an observation, sometimes we need to develop an observation schedule. And the observation schedule gives out clearly, what did you observe, what time was the action conducted, who was interacting with whom. All this needs to be jotted down in the observation schedule. Now from mere observation, we are moving into participant observation, which is closer to ethnography. So it's not necessary that all the time we are doing participant observation, but we can do observation itself. And that is why we are talking about non-participant observation. That means very limited interference of the ethnographer in the context of people. That means you're observing from a distance, but you are making observation. Participant observation, on the other hand, is about involving oneself within the context of the activity, the people, and sometimes you are also conducting those activities yourself. So merely being present in the cultural context does not translate to participant observation. At best, it is a great degree of participation, but it is not participant observation. That means you are participating in the lives of people, in the activity, in the action, but at the same time, you are also making observations. So there is observation that we are doing, there is participation, and then there is participant observation. So observation is non-participant also, that you're not participating in the lives of people. So these are all degrees or levels of participation. So in participant observation, the degree of participation is way higher than non-participant or just merely observing as an outsider. In participant observation, basically the researcher establishes a direct relationship with social actors. That means you are known that you are there for a particular purpose. People know that you are interested in some aspect of people's lives. You are interested in the cultures of people. So you establish a direct relationship with social actors. It is not using, another person to gather information, or you're using a questionnaire that you're mailing to somebody and the person fills it and sends it back to you. No, here there is a face-to-face, direct, established relationship between the participant. The participant is the people, right? The people who are belonging to a particular community or culture. And the ethnographer is one who's interested in gathering that information. So participant here means anyone who is a member of that society, that community, or that activity. And the ethnographer is interested in understanding various aspects of the life of the participants. And of course, they have to be staying in their natural environment. Natural environment does not mean the mountains and the forest alone. It can mean the social setting in which one is located, right? So the social setting becomes a natural environment for that person, because that is where they're performing their activities, they're conducting themselves, or they are behaving culturally in a given context. And the purpose of participant observation is to observe and describe that behavior. So by interacting and participating in everyday ceremonies, activities, and rituals. That means one is just participating there, but participating and observing, that's a very important aspect. That means, in some sense, we can do participant observation in everyday life. That means we create those situations or conditions where we start observing rather than just merely participating. Basically, the idea is to learn their code in order to understand the meanings of the actions of people. So participant observation is about not only just participating in the lives of people, but is about also observing. Now, when we say participating and observing, that means there are two aspects happening here. You're very much part of the activity, the ritual, but you are there making very careful observations. And the careful observations need to be written down. So in other words, there is the aspect of note taking. Now, another important aspect when we're talking about participant observation is basically gaining access. How do we gain access into the people's lives and to conduct participant observation? And of course, this takes us to the aspect of, do we tell people the reason of why we are doing research? That means, is our research a covert or an overt research activity? That means, do we hide things and not disclose this fact that we are gathering data about being involved with people's lives? Right? Now, this is an important aspect because this relates to the ethical aspects of conducting research. So naturally, we have to be overt about our research. We need to seek permission from people and gain access into the community or the culture, the setting, seek permission in order to conduct our research. So our research is about seeking permission. It is about an overt research practice. That means we cannot be hidden spies in gathering data. We need to seek permission as an ethical approach in conducting our research. However, having said this, participant observation is not a method that allows itself to be used in all places, because some places cannot be accessed due to our age, maybe due to our sex, maybe due to our background, color, or the class we belong. So just because we are saying participant observation, the doctor will not allow me to enter the operation theater. And even if I'm entering the operation theater, I'm a light participant and observer. Of course, you cannot go and conduct a surgery onto the patient. And that will be, an extreme level of participant observation. It would require great skill. It would require maybe, a clearances from the government as a practitioner. So not all spaces allow for the use of participant observation. So where participant observation is not allowing you to conduct, perhaps you could opt for just merely observation, because through observation also we can gain much more in what we are setting out to study. And we have to explain our research, the intention, the purpose to the participants who are engaging in this ethnographic project that the ethnographer is involved in. So we cannot go as undercover researchers without the knowledge of participants. This is a very important aspect, and we need to give special attention to this. So participant observation, ethnographic research requires gaining access, and this gaining access is overtly telling the reason. And sometimes you may be denied, right? But then we have to make that effort. And just because we do not get access or permission does not mean that we should abandon the project. We have to think of other ways of conducting that research. But we need to take, permission, and also in gaining access for conducting ethnographic fieldwork or to employ participant observation. And all this definitely takes time, because it is not a quick survey. It is not, a one-day affair that one can do ethnography. It requires time. In classical sense of doing ethnography, we are told that at least 1 year of time should be dedicated to doing ethnographic research, where we employ these various tools, because we look at maybe, a complete cycle of the season in which people are located, or, the activities which people are doing. So 1 year of time, of course, is ideal, but sometimes it does not allow us to do this. But there are people who do good ethnographic research based on a few months of study. But the point is that ethnographic research requires time. It cannot be done overnight. It cannot be done 2 or 3 days. And the most important aspect of conducting participant observation is we need to learn the language of the participants. Otherwise, we will not be able to arrive at the meanings that people ascribe to their way of life, or what really people are thinking and saying. So learning the language becomes very, very important when we are talking about participant observation. And most importantly, while doing either observation or participant observation, we have to take notes. Without taking notes, we cannot proceed in conducting our ethnographic research. Okay. Am I audible, or have I lost all of you?
Yes, sir. You are.
Okay. So should I proceed?
Yes, sir, but there is a technical problem with us. We are unable to share the PowerPoint. You can proceed.
Okay, no problem. Then can I go ahead? Is that all
Yes,
right? Should I
yes.
go ahead? Or
Yes, sir.
okay, fine. Okay. The next aspect of the tool for gathering data, ethnographic data, is I spoke about observation. I spoke about non-participant observation. I spoke about participant observation. Now I'm emphasizing the aspect of interviewing. And when we say interviewing, basically we are emphasizing the speech act itself. That means one is interview is a method of data gathering. And interviewing basically is it ranges from informal conversations. It can be opportunistic chats. It can be questions that arise at the spur of the moment. It can be in-depth interviews or group interviews. But when we say interview, basically we are asking questions. And informal conversations also we ask questions. Like we say, so what? Then what happened? So people respond. So central to interviewing is the task of asking questions. And the task of asking questions is to learn about people and their cultural worlds. That means through language and words, how do people think about their context, their own social worlds? So basically, when we say interviewing, we are engaging with the speech act. That means we are engaging with words, the spoken word. So unless we ask a question, we do not get a response. So observation is based on using eyes, observing, and looking around how people are behaving, the actions they're conducting. On the other hand, interviewing emphasizes the speech aspect of people. So interview is a method of data gathering. But in reality, if the way we conduct ethnographies, we do not make a clear-cut distinction between participant observation and interview. Because while doing participant observation also, you may ask a question. Right? While you're participating and observing, you may ask your, the respondent who's very close to you and has developed a good rapport with you. You may ask a question. So this distinction between participant observation, interviewing is for our understanding. But while conducting ethnographic research, they will overlap. That means it's not like now I will employ participant observation and now I'll apply interviewing. No, they may substitute each other, they may complement each other during the ethnographic process. Right? So it's very difficult to prescribe how to do an interview. At best, we can only give you a kind of framework or a map of conducting an interview. But we cannot teach you that this is how. Because after all, ethnography is best when it is done. We can teach in classrooms, we can provide enough material, we can provide hands-on training. But the best learning comes by doing ethnography oneself. So it is very difficult to prescribe how to do an interview. And there is no fixed way of how an ethnographer wants to conduct an interview. But these are largely just guidelines of going about doing interviews. So there are three kinds of interviews which are structured, the structured interviews, there are unstructured interviews, and semi-structured interviews. In structured interviews, basically it's like conducting a survey. It's based on a survey style, where in the survey questions are predetermined. They're closed-ended, right? And you cannot add extra questions as you go along, right? So questions are asked by the interviewer in a stated format, right? So you stick to the format of conducting that interview. So it's predetermined and there's no room for extra questions to be added. And that would be a structured interview. So by and large, and to some extent, you can conduct a structured interview in ethnography, but that's not going to take you very far. So, you have these television shows or podcasts where people are interviewing a politician, an important thinker or a leader. They by and large follow a kind of structured interviewing approach. That means the interviewer has a fixed sets of questions in which they want to extract the understanding from that person, right? So that's structured interview. Unstructured interview is more free flowing. And what we mean by free flowing is that it is open-ended. The questions are not fixed, right? At best, the interviewer has a guide or a plan or simply a topic which one would want to use in order to gather data or information about a particular topic. And in this, the respondent or the interviewer gives a great opportunity to the respondent or the interviewee to respond in a leisure manner. Structured interviews, time is limited. So structured interviews may be best suited to talk to maybe politicians or maybe a police officer, an important key person, because they may not give you too much time. So you have to pre-think what all you want to know from the person. Whereas unstructured interview is free-flowing, it is open-ended, and it gives leisure time for the person to respond on their own. And that is why ethnographic interviews prefers the unstructured interview approach more, because it gives more space for respondents to think about the question, reflect on the social worlds, and then respond. At the same time, there is the semi-structured interview, which contains elements of both the styles, the structured and the unstructured interviews. That means it explores the ideas of the participants, and also it gets fixed responses about some aspects about the field of inquiry or the aspect that the ethnographer is trying to study. So in other words, ethnographic interview goes usually by using unstructured or semi-structured interviews. Because an important aspect which I did not highlight in the beginning of the lecture is that we need to keep in mind that ethnographic research basically is an iterative process of doing research. And what I mean by iterative process is that it does not follow a fixed sequence of procedures of conducting research. It is not a linear manner in which, say for example, a survey, you prepare the questions and then you go out into the community, ask the questions, fill it, and then come back and then analyze. No, in ethnographic research, there is the aspect of asking questions, there is note taking, And the process of analysis already begins during the process of ethnography itself. That means your mind is already analyzing. So based on the responses of the interviewee, you pose another set of questions. So basically, it is a back and forth process of conducting qualitative research. So ethnographic research is iterative. It does not follow a linear model for conducting research. So when we're talking about interviews, we are concerned about structured interviews, unstructured interviews, and semi-structured interviews. And I told you that the structured interview, depending on whom you want to interview, the kind of interview that you want to invoke will depend on what you want to know and from whom you want to know. So that is why which approach or which interview works best will depend on whom you're talking to and what you want to know. So ethnographic research primarily emphasizes more on unstructured interviews and semi-structured interviews, right? Because it gives way for open-ended responses, and there is a free-floating discussion about the ideas, the topics that one is interested in. Having said that, what basically ethnography adopts unstructured interviews as it encourages reflexivity to give time to people to delve into their thoughts, express their contradictory opinions, their doubts, hopes, and fears. It allows for wandering off and helps the ethnographer to learn from people to get an insider's perspective. And this quote is from Karen O'Reilly's book, Research Methods, Ethnographic Research Methods, where she says that ethnography basically encourages unstructured interviews because it allows for people to reflect on the question and think about their social worlds and then express the thoughts and also the contradictions which emerge in understanding that social phenomena, their doubts, hopes, and also fears. And it allows for wandering. And this helps the ethnographer to gain more insight into the insider's perspective. Having said that, we move into two different aspects of interviewing, which is what the anthropologist James Bradley talks about, is asking ethnographic and descriptive questions. Because when we're talking about interviewing, basically the conventional interviewing occurs in two separate cultural worlds. And what I mean by this is two separate cultural worlds is there is the world of the cultural world of the ethnographer and there is the cultural world of the respondent. So in a formal interview, there are two cultural worlds coming together and questions are being asked and responses are given. All right? So in other words, there is a great emphasis in making this connection between the two different cultural worlds that are involved in the process of asking questions in an interview. But ethnographic interview begins with this assumption that question and answer sequence is a single element of human thinking. That means question and answers are part of the same cognitive human thinking. Because questions imply answers and the responses that come from the question raised, the statement made implies the questions which may emerge based on the responses. Right? In other words, in ethnographic interviewing, both questions and answers must be discovered from the informants. So what James Bradley says is basically that in ethnographic interviewing, the cultural world is the same. because the ethnographer is raising questions based on the responses which the respondent is giving. So questions are not predetermined. They're not fixed. Of course, we need to begin somewhere, but that beginning is just to begin the probe of asking questions. Based on the response that comes, you are also discovering questions which are emerging from the questions and the responses that the respondent is giving. So both questions and answers must be discovered from informants. Unlike, say, the conventional interviewing, where the question is asked and the response is given. In ethnographic interviewing, the questions also need to come from the responses that people are giving. So there is, in the interviewing process, basically what is required is the aspect of building a rapport. Because when we are interviewing, in ethnographic interviewing, the nature of the responses that we get depends on the kind of rapport that one has built with the respondent. Because based on the rapport that we establish, people give the kind of answer that means they are confident in talking about their own life or the aspect that people are interested in. So rapport building is a very important aspect of interviewing process, right? Now, what is a rapport building? Rapport building basically means that we establish a friendly relationship with people. That means it may be formal in the beginning, but there is a kind of cordial relationship. It's not a hostile environment. Only then we can talk about a rapport. That means the respondent has some confidence in the ethnographer who is posing questions. In other words, rapport is very central to the process of asking questions, because then only people will open up to share their own cultural worlds. Right? So when we're talking about rapport building, there are basically 4 different stages which James Bradley talks about. Is that the ethnographic interviewing process begins with a great deal of apprehension. It begins with apprehension. Then the interviewee and the interviewer move into a space of exploration. Then they move into a space of cooperation. And finally, there is the aspect of participation. Now, what is this apprehension that James Bradley is talking about? Basically, he says that it begins with a great deal of uncertainty. Uncertainty where people are doubting your aim, they are suspicious of why you are asking these questions, and there is a deep anxiety about the whole process itself. Basically, the ethnographer and the respondent both are apprehensive of each other's role. That means you're also doubtful whether the person is speaking the truth or is saying what the question is being asked. You are also anxious. Will people really accept me? Will they talk to me? Right? So there is a great deal of anxiety, suspicion, and by this, the interviewing process begins in the context of ethnographic interviewing. So how to deal with apprehension? James Bradley says the best way to deal with apprehension is to keep the informants talking. It does not matter whether they are talking the questions that you are wanting to know. No, you get people to talk. Let them express themselves. Listen to them with a patient ear. Because after all, the ethnographer should don on the role of a humble learner. That is why I said it is about studying with people. because we are there to learn from the people about their own worlds, their own lives. So we have to take on the role of a humble learner and let people talk about their various aspects of life, maybe their problems, or if they're inquiring about you. So the only way to deal with apprehension is to get the respondent, your informant, to keep talking. And then only you can deal with this apprehension, because talking is a way of establishing familiarity, right? So apprehension can be dealt with a great deal of talking, and then you move into the stage of exploration where both are trying out this new relationship, right? And this is where you have to take time in listening to what people are saying, and they are also observing and testing what the ethnographer is up to. So exploration is they are exploring the new relationship that is forged between the ethnographer and the respondent. At the same time, we have to exhibit curiosity. We have to exhibit that we are interested in. And how do we do this? We make repeated explanations. That means you need to clarify yourself now and then that, I am here to learn about your culture. I want to know how you conduct this activity. I want to know what is it to be working in a hospital setting, right? So we have to constantly keep repeatedly explaining your purpose, your role, and also why you are there, asking questions from people. And to deal with exploration, we need to constantly reinstate what informants are saying. That means we repeat certain phrases, we repeat certain terms that people are using, because restating demonstrates basically an interest in learning the informant's language and culture. So once you start employing the words which people are using in the language that people are using, you are exhibiting as an ethnographer that you are interested in the process. You are interested in learning about the life of people. So exploration is about making repeated explanations of why you are doing this, why you are there. At the same time, you are restating the statements, phrases, and the terms which informants are using. And this only goes on to show that you mean business and you are here for that. So exploration finally gives way to cooperation, where both begin knowing the goal of the interview. That means the goal of the interview is to discover the culture of the respondent, the participant, in the language of the informant, right? And cooperation can be exhibited when the respondent or the informant corrects the ethnographer. Like what James Padley gives an example, and he says, the respondent says, no. While talking about homeless people, he says, no, I wouldn't say the police arrested me, but that a bull pinched me. Because bull refers to the policeman in which James Padley was conducting the research in the US. The police are referred to as bull by the homeless people, and pinched me means being arrested. Now you see, this is a cultural phrase of referring to a particular action. So here the respondent may correct you and say, no, we would say it like this, which means that there is a great deal of cooperation emerging in the interview process, right? And finally, we move on to the stage of participation. That means the informant recognizes and accepts the role of a teacher to the ethnographer. That means they have understood why the ethnographer is here and what do they want to know, and why is this ethnographic interviewing being conducted, and they take on the role of a teacher, and from cooperation, it moves into participation. That means the informant or the participant himself or herself starts analyzing their own culture. In that sense, they become participant observers of their own culture to communicate that understanding or learning to the ethnographer. Now, having said this, it does not mean that all interview process will necessarily go through these 4 stages. Sometimes it may just end up at cooperation. But ideally, participation would mean that you have entered a new terrain of where people begin taking on the role of a teacher, and the ethnographer used to be a teacher. Right? So along with ethnographic interviews, what James Padley talks about is we need to ask descriptive questions. And what are descriptive questions is we take the advantage of power of language to constitute settings, to analyze settings. That means through using language, we try and understand the cultural setting that we are located in. So basically, questions should emerge from the same cultural system. That means the questions that are coming from the way respondents are responding to the questions one is asking. And that is why you need to know at least something about the setting in which the informant is carrying out their routine activities. What Spradley talks is asking grand tour questions. So one is grand tour observation, another is grand tour questions. So say, for example, can you describe a typical day as a housewife? Right? So what are you doing? You are asking a grand tour question. Or can you describe your university? Or can you describe the hospital setting? Or can you describe a typical day in the hospital? Now you see, the question is very broad. And this allows the respondent to think about the cultural world and respond. And this is basically a descriptive question. So basically the key principle in descriptive questions is expanding the length of the question tends to expand the length of the response. So from a grand tour question, you can move into mini tour questions. That means you start asking questions about very specific domains of what you want to know, a particular setting or a particular action or a particular activity in the context of which you are wanting to understand. So we begin with a broad expanded length of questioning so that you get expanded length of responses in which you further raise questions for further inquiry. And this is what an ethnographic interviewing using descriptive questions would mean. So say, for example, could you tell me what the jail is like? So we have not been, hopefully nobody goes to jail, but you want to know what if somebody is studying the jail setting. One is observing oneself, but also trying to understand from the one who's been there of what the setting of a jail is like. So you need to know that somebody who spent considerable time in a jail, and then ask them, could you please describe a typical day in the jail setting? So by keeping the length of the question broad, your responses will be broad, and from there on, you can start narrowing down. Right? So now I'm going to conclude now, because in conclusion, I would say that the ethnographer is the primary instrument of data gathering. We need to think of data collection method not as a standalone, but complementing each other. So when we're talking about data gathering, whether it is observation, whether it is interviewing, they complement each other in gathering our data that we are interested in. And of course, all this is supported by ways of, recording them using visual medium, or we can record them using audio recorders. But primarily, we use field notes. So jotting down, that means observing, recalling from memory, and writing down, or what Roger Sanjek would call as scratch notes. We just make some scribbling notes so that it helps us recall what the person said, what they were talking about. So field notes, recording devices actually support the process of observation and interviewing. So ethnography adopts an iterative process, thereby making it very different from other kinds of research methods. And ethnography is both a process and a product which involves various methods or techniques of data collection. So what have we learned from today's lecture? We learned what is ethnography. We learned the two aspects, which is non-verbal and the speech acts, by using the ethnographer itself as an instrument and extending the various senses to gather data or information. We learned about observation, participant observation, and interviewing. We learned about ethnographic and descriptive questions and the rapport process in ethnographic interviewing and ethnographic questions itself. The references that I've used are Alan Bryman's Ethnography, which is published by Sage, G. Gobo, Doing Ethnography, Francis Mueller, Designed Ethnography, Epistemology and Methodology, Karen O'Reilly's Ethnographic Methods, and finally, James Bradley's The Ethnographic Interview. Thank you. I have ended my talk here, and I hope you have some aspect of what the tools and techniques of gathering data in the context of ethnography.
Yes, thank you so much, sir. Thank you for your enriching lecture on the particular topic. So now the session is open for discussion. If anyone has any questions or doubts, you can send your questions in the chat box, as well as you can raise your hand and unmute yourself to ask questions.
So
I think
yeah.
Yes, sir.
I will definitely share the PPT for your own ready reference.
Yes, sir. We can also
there's a question. Sorry, there's a question here. Difference between ethnography and monograph. So I think Aku Nada has asked this question. What is the difference between ethnography and monograph? I think it's a relevant question. Ethnography basically would lead to a monograph. Monograph is a single description about a particular community or a case which is written up. That means the monograph is the product part of the ethnography, whereas the ethnography is the process part. So a monograph cannot appear without conducting ethnography. Aku, I hope I have addressed your question. In other words, monograph and ethnography are related, because monograph is a detailed description about a single community. It can be an event, it can be about a procedure. It is the written up aspect, right? The ethnography is the processual part, which appears as a monograph. So the Argonauts of Western Pacific is a monograph. But how did the monograph come into place? Or we talk about Remembered Village by Professor M. N. Srinivas. Or we talk about The New Year, by Evans Pritchard. How did this come out? It is a monograph because it deals with a particular setting. It deals with a particular village. It deals with a particular community. It deals with maybe a particular procedure. But its appearance comes out from the process of doing ethnography.
Yes, thank you, sir.
Yeah.
I think there are no more questions. I think there are no more questions. So yes.
Okay.
You
I
are-
will definitely share the PPT and a reading, and I will also share one reading by James Bradley on asking descriptive questions. I think that's a very important skill to learn. It's not easy. I mean, but of course, we can talk a lot about ethnography, but unless you do it, unless you practice it, we will not go ahead in the process of ethnographic methods. So it has to be put to practice. So I have given a small skill or activity to the organizers. If all of you could engage with it, it will be helpful in the process of learning. Ms. Priyam, over to you, please.
Yes, sir. Thank you so much for your session. And sir has basically given us all the ideas regarding the techniques of methodology. We have learned ethnography. Then he had also focused about the 9 dimensions and all these things. So, and yes, there will be a feedback link after this session. You can submit there, and please remember to screenshot it, and the assignment will be given in the classroom. They can submit there only. So yes, I would like to extend my heartfelt gratitude again to Alok Pandey sir.
Thank you.
And
Thank you. Thanks to all of you.
IQSC coordinators, then admins, and all the participants. And yes, again, sorry for the technical issues. And yes, sir. So thank you. Thank you so much, sir.
I would like to thank the organizers once again and all the participants who have been patient in listening to me in spite of the technical glitches. Thank you, and I hope we have learned something about ethnography, the tools and techniques, and you go back with some reflection from this session. I'm always open to questions. You can always email me. The email will be available with the organizers, or you can just go to Google and from the website you can get it. This is my email in case, sorry, just a minute. This is my email. Feel free to shoot an email if you have any doubt, or I can be of any help in further understanding ethnography and its methodology or methods that we use. Thank you.
Thank you so much, sir.
So can I log out?
Yeah, sure, sir.
Thank you. Thanks so much. Have a nice day, all of you.
You too, sir.
Thank you.